Welcome to the channel. My name is Dennis and wearing my Aloha shirt to speak to you today about this really dark period of Hawaiian history that even a lot of Hawaiians aren't familiar with, called the Dark Decade. Now, if I was to tell you that there was a time in Hawaiian history where Catholics were asked forcibly to renounce their Catholic faith and join another religion, otherwise face punishment, imprisonment, and perhaps death, you would think that the Muslims had made their way to the Sandwich Islands back at that time. But no, these were Christians, other fellow Christians doing this. And so this brings us to a time in Hawaiian history in 1820 when the first missionaries arrived from New England. They were Congregationalists, and they brought the Protestant faith with them to evangelize the Hawaiian natives and set up schools. And they were very successful in doing this. And a couple reasons for that was, number one is King Kamehameha II had died around this time, and also they had abolished the ancient kapu system. So the local Hawaiian population was very curious about this new religion called Christianity, because all of their old ways of, knowing and learning and worshiping pagan gods was gone. So they were very curious about the Christian faith, and so the Protestants were very successful at baptizing and educating, catechizing the local population, and in particular, the monarchy. And so Queen Ka'ahumanu herself, who was the regency and basically running the show for the Hawaiian Islands, she herself was baptized and became a very strong Christian. Well, some French priests had gone to Hawaii in 1827, thinking they could also do the same thing, that there was room enough for more than one Christian denomination. And so they went there with their Catholic faith, and they were not welcomed by the Queen nor the Protestants that were there. And so they were asked immediately to leave. You can imagine, they had just sailed 8 months to get there. One priest that was with them had lost his life on the way over. And unfortunately, they had no way to go back home, because the captain of the ship that brought them there said that he'd only take them away if somebody was going to pay their way, and nobody was willing to do that. So reluctantly, they were allowed to stay, and a sympathetic foreigner put them up literally in a grass shack. But the first Catholic Mass was then said in the summer of 1827 on Oahu in Honolulu. And for several years, there was a lot of success in them baptizing and catechizing the local populations. But all this going on to the dismay of the Queen and the missionaries, the Protestants that were there before them. And so, of course, a lot of the same arguments that we hear 200 years later, were promulgated at that time, that the Catholics were involved in idolatry and worshiping Mary and worshiping the saints and so on and so on. So, unfortunately, because the Queen they had such influence with the Queen, after several years, she had decided to make it illegal to be Catholic in the Sandwich Islands, and anybody that professed to be Catholic, to be engaging in practicing Catholicism, was going to be tortured, imprisoned, and perhaps put to death. And that's exactly what happened. And so if somebody was caught saying a Hail Mary, if there was a Mass that was being said, if they attended Mass, if they were saying any Catholic prayers, wearing a crucifix around their neck, they were going to be imprisoned and tortured. Tremendous slave labor. So at this time in 1831, I believe it was, the Catholic priests that were there were expelled. And so they were forcibly removed on a ship that went to California. And they told the Hawaiian populations that they had baptized that were Catholic, as they were getting on that ship, they told them to obey God's laws over man's laws. So they had thought that the Catholic faith would be short-lived and die out shortly after they departed. And that was not the case. In fact, it emboldened the Catholics that were there. And there were several that were very much involved in continuing the faith and baptizing and catechizing. And they were successful in doing this because they went to remote areas of Hawaii, of Oahu. They went to the windward side. They went to the north shore, Wailua, where they were able to catechize and baptize and keep the faith alive underground because there was less eyes looking at their movements from the terms of the government standpoint. And so they were very successful in keeping the faith alive during these years. But for those that were caught, it was tremendous hard labor, slave labor, the most, if you can just imagine the worst possible conditions slaves could be in. But they kind of invoked this psychological warfare, the Hawaiian government, and they imprisoned people with common thieves. But they were imprisoning and torturing women, nursing mothers, people that were sick, the elderly, and children, thinking that if they focused on those people, that the rest of the Catholics that were not infirm or elderly would renounce their faith. But it had just the opposite effect, and these people would not renounce their Catholic faith, and they stood strong, and many of them died as a result of their imprisonment and the terrible conditions that they had to endure. And so maybe at some point we might see some people be martyred and be recognized as martyrs at this time. But also for these people that kept the faith alive during those years of the dark decade in the 1830s. Fortunately, in 1840, French priests, missionaries came back to Hawaii, and there was quite a bit of pressure. I think they had a French warship off the coast of Honolulu that was pressuring the monarchy and the queen to allow religious freedom. So they acquiesced and they finally gave in to allow religious tolerance, religious freedom in the Sandwich Islands from 1840 on. And the priests that first came back to Hawaii at that time thought that they'd have to start all over, and then they discovered this underground church was still in existence. Masses have been said ever since 1840 all throughout the islands of Hawaii and continue to this day. So that's a little bit of some dark history from Hawaii, but one that is really interesting to look back on. And I'd like to think that we've come a lot further since then. So thanks so much for watching. God bless. Hope to see you in heaven.